Welcome to Withdraw Consent. My name is Victor. This is Jack. So we had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and he brought up the KKK, and my response was, well, we don't believe what they believe. Because in my mind, I'm picturing like lynchings and all that kind of stuff. And his response was, well, what iteration of the KKK? And I realized I have no idea what I'm talking about. I just know stuff that I've seen on TV shows or what I've been... And something I've never thought to reconsider my position on. I just assumed they were bad.
Right.
And so today we're going to get a little history lesson on where they came from and the different iterations. And so I know I'm going to learn because I know nothing apparently.
Okay. So yeah, there's 3 different iterations of the KKK.
Okay.
And so we're just going to basically go through them one at a time. And we're going to get briefer and briefer as we talk about because they're less and less consequential.
Oh, okay.
As we go through. The first one we're going to spend the most time on. And so when you hear something like, okay, there was a KKK movie, and it was called The Birth of a Nation.
Okay.
And Woodrow Wilson had a showing of it at the White House.
Hmm.
And you're like, the heck? This is a movie about the first iteration of the KKK. So if you're getting confused and thinking he's in the time of the second KKK, or you're in the time of the third KKK, if you're thinking about that, you're just going to get totally confused. So let's talk about the first one, okay? Civil War ends April 9th, 1865. The Reconstruction era begins, okay? This is going to be a terrible thing for the South, Reconstruction, okay? So let's rewind. That's 1965. Let's rewind 1962. Congress had made a thing called the Ironclad Oath, which made all federal employees swear that they had never borne arms against the Union or supported the Confederacy, had given, quote, no aid, countenance, counsel, or encouragement, end quote, to persons in rebellion, and had exercised or attempted to exercise the functions of an office under the Confederacy, right?
So it discounted everyone from the South from participating in the federal
government. Right.
Wow.
In their own federal governments. But just on your oath, like they're not even talking about like you took up arms. They're saying you gave aid, countenance, counsel, or encouragement. Go guys, you got it.
Right.
You're out.
That's
and
crazy.
if you want to go lie on your oath, you could lie on your oath. They could catch you on that and imprison you. You could go to hell for it, if you're a person of faith. So anyways, I had never heard about that until
yeah.
Well, I guess I had read this book before. Some of this is from the book called March of the Titans, which will be the first reference below. And I've read it before, but I reread the section for this. Anyways, so the Reconstruction Act in March 1867, so there's 2 years after the war, right?
Okay.
Military governments were set up in states dissenting from the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment is in the process of being passed, but if you're in a state where you're like, we're not going to approve this, then they send military governments in your state, right?
Okay.
Because you're gonna accept the 14th Amendment. They put a military government in your state. Each military commander was made responsible for overseeing the rewriting of each state's constitution so that the 14th Amendment would be passed. It's against the will of the people, against the will of the actual governing bodies of the states.
And what is the 14th?
The 14th is it's the equality.
Oh, okay.
It's gonna make sure everybody's free.
Gotcha.
It's going to this is the one that they're using against Trump right now. This is the one that says if you've insurrection.
Okay.
If you've been involved in insurrection, you're completely disenfranchised. So basically, under these regulations, the South was divided into 5 military districts. Each were supervised by a Union general, right, in command of a detachment of troops, which were mainly comprised of freed black slaves. So you wonder how this is going as they're rewriting your state constitution to disenfranchise you from voting.
Right.
So this is happening. So then at that point that happened, the 14th Amendment had already passed the House, but it was going through the process. It was working. Anyways, the 14th Amendment got finished July 9th, 1868. So the year after that Reconstruction Act I was talking about. Okay, with Southern whites disenfranchised, black voters began to dominate state legislatures and ordered compensation payments to be made to blacks as part of the Reconstruction. That's still happening. In some states, taxes were tripled.
Wow.
Because the black people were now in office and they were the voters. There's not a lot of white voters. And they're like, we'll just vote their money to us.
That's crazy.
Boy, it's funny that would be happening today as well. 150 years later. Amazing.
Wait, did all that go through? Was the money actually distributed to black people?
Yeah. They were getting reparations, but only in specific states. So you can't say all black people have been reparated. I don't know what the exact word is.
Okay.
Amazing. Okay. So Northerners were like, oh man, they're looting down there. We need to go loot too. So Northerners who came down to participate in this, they were called the carpetbaggers, if
Okay.
you remember from history class. And they were basically just embezzling funds for themselves to send up north.
Oh, okay.
So they were despised by the Southerners too. Okay. Thus brings us the first iteration of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, you got to keep in mind that if you are in a country where they're saying, if you do anything against us, you're completely disenfranchised. You now have to hide your identity when you want to fight for your rights back.
Okay.
So they put on the hoods and stuff, and they keep it like we're not sure exactly who the first Grand Wizard was. Historically,
Really interesting.
We got a theory. It's widely held that, but we don't know. So basically, in Pulaski, Tennessee, during the winter of 1965, 6 former Confederate officers created the KKK. Can't tell you exactly who they are because it's a real secret, right? Basically, they got the Ku Klux Klan name from the Greek word kuklos, which means circle. So
Okay.
it comes from a Greek derivation. I can't exactly explain that. Anyways, it has long been claimed that Confederate General Nathan B. Forrest was the founder and the Great Wizard. So they're hypothesizing that he was one of the 6
Okay.
and that he was also the first Grand Wizard. So, they wore the robes to disguise themselves, yeah, and then also to frighten black people, which is like historically a thing that's worked very well. Like it sounds a little racist that they were doing that, but if you think about it, there was like a situation in Africa where there were settlers and they were surrounded by, 30,000 Zulus who could have killed them at any time. But then they turned out all the lights in their camp and they put lanterns under white sheets and they said, woo, up there. Armies fled.
Oh, it's like a superstition or
Right.
ghosts.
So
or-
like when you think
Ah.
frightened blacks and you're like, well, you're racist. No, I mean, that's a thing historically in their era
Yeah.
that's been happening,
Sure.
I'm sure African blacks are more susceptible than the free black slaves because they've, what I mean?
Yeah.
They've seen some more fantastic things. Anyways, so what happened is this first iteration of the KKK launches a campaign of violent resistance to the disenfranchisement and discrimination that they were victims of during the Reconstruction era. Understandable, right?
Yeah, seems like it.
Don't really hate them for that. Okay. In Louisiana, more than half of the white population had been disenfranchised. So imagine, there's a ton of blacks, half of the white people can't vote.
Wow.
Like, just imagine what's going to happen. So, in 1871, President Ulysses Grant, former general, now president, enacted the 1871 Civil Rights Act, which allowed the president to suppress state disorders on his own initiative and to suspend the right to habeas corpus.
Wow.
Listen, I hate making this statement because I can see a future where I'm in charge and I suspend habeas corpus. But I'm just going to tell you that all the people who suspend habeas corpus, they're the bad guys.
Okay.
I can only think of 2, Grant and Lincoln. I'm just saying, you're probably the bad guy. Okay. The act was known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, and it was meant to shut down the KKK. This was just for the KKK.
Wow.
The KKK
Okay.
was causing so much ruckus that they made a civil rights act for civil rights. Loss of civil rights, Anyways, so then, like I said, Louisiana, half of them were disenfranchised. And what happened is there was a corruption-ridden 1872 gubernatorial election, which provoked an attempted coup d'etat by KKK supporters. They called themselves, because they were trying to get away from the name KKK so that they wouldn't get suppressed by the KKK Act,
Okay.
the Civil Rights Act, So they called themselves the White League. Okay?
Okay.
Basically, what happened is this uprising, which is known as the Battle of Liberty Place, occurred in New Orleans on September 14th, 1872, when around 3,500 White Leaguers members seized control of the City Hall, State House, and Arsenal. Right? They went into full all-out fighting with the Metropolitan Police and the state militia, which were dominated by black people. So they're sending in all the blacks to fight these whites who were trying to get their rights back. Basically, they held their positions for 3 days until federal troops arrived. Then they start exchanging cannon fire in the city center. The city center is getting wrecked, and they're defending multiple buildings. They got the arsenal, and they're just like, it's wild in New Orleans. I'll just tell
it's
you.
crazy.
Yeah. And so eventually they have to retreat from their position because
Okay.
the federal troops are just too many, But unrest from people like them, like the White League, like the KKK, continued to the point where the federal government imposed martial law in the state in order to restore order, which is a big step, right? So the ongoing chaos and popular opposition to the more extreme Reconstruction laws in both the North and the South contributed toward the piecemeal collapse of the antebellum Republican governments of the South. So these Southern governments are going to collapse, right? Basically, there's this new group of conservative white Democrats, which is interesting. Conservative white Democrats, calling themselves, quote, redeemers, slowly regained control of the southern states, mostly by enrolling new white voters who were not part of the former Confederacy. These are 18-year-olds coming up, and they're just, we just got to get the white people to be able to vote again, or the citizens of the state, we'll just say. Anyways, in 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes is elected. Right? He's a Republican, of course, because only Republican can win because they got all these fake governments. And he immediately withdraws the federal troops from the South. That causes these black governments to just collapse instantly. There's no support for him.
Okay.
The white people are furious. And then basically they just become all white governments again.
So they've had the generals there in the 5 military have been there that entire almost decade?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I don't know if after 68 when the 14th Amendment passed, I don't know if they withdrew them. I'm not exactly sure. But these governments were being propped up by the federal government. Okay. And once they withdrew military force, the governments went from being mostly black to just mostly white immediately.
It reminds me of Afghanistan, kind of. As soon as the troops pull out, it goes back to its natural state.
Interesting.
It's a forced, fake existence.
And I mean, if you just want to just theorize about history, right? So you're going to go through a period, and you're going to do after this. You're going to do Jim Crow laws. You're going to do all types of stuff, right? You're going to do people in the South just saying the N-word all the time. Do you want to know why?
It's resentment.
It wasn't because you were a former slave. It wasn't because they think it's because once you got an inkling of power, you used it to abuse and trash them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And they remember, and the grandfathers remember, and I'm just saying, you had a shot to be noble in that instance. I'll just say. You could have, but of course it would be impossible for them to be noble because they were just slaves and they're furious about that. So it's kind of more like the Palestinian Israel just cycle of violence where you just, and then this side does this. Anyways, the first iteration of the Klan thus ended in the 1860s and 1870s.
Oh, okay.
And so that was it. So when Woodrow Wilson's showing The Birth of a Nation, they're just talking about this stuff.
Oh.
They're talking about white people putting on hoods and fighting against their voting disenfranchisement.
But they weren't fighting black people. In my head.
But they were fighting black people because the government would use black people as the police and the militia to go out.
Yeah, but they weren't fighting them because they were black.
They
were fighting the federal government for being the worst. They always are.
They were continuing the Confederacy because the Confederacy was just trying to get power. That's it. They were being stripped of power, so they seceded.
Right.
Then they were like, hey, we'll bully you back in. No, let's fight them. And now they're still stripping them from power, and they're just continuing the same fight.
Okay.
They're just doing it wearing hoods. So anyways, my point here is that basically when you talk about the KKK, and you're like, oh, they're a bunch of racists or something, do you know? Do you know about this battle of Liberty Place where 3,500 men went to give up their lives so they could have political power back? Amazing, know?
And so this was about a decade, the first iteration?
Yeah, basically. I mean, kind of not even that long because if you look at it, they said it started in 65 and then in 71, that Civil Rights Act kind of shut it down.
Oh, okay.
So that even when this fight came in 72, 1 year later, they were already calling themselves something else, the White League, because they were trying to get away from less than a decade span here. Okay. So the second iteration is also interesting. And I got a link in the description below for an article on this. It was started in 1915 and claimed a membership of 4 to 5 million people, about 15% of the nation's eligible population after World War I, and then dissipated before World War II. So I checked those numbers. In 1920 census, there was 106 million total Americans.
Okay.
And in the election of 1920, 25.3 million Americans voted.
Wow. Okay.
And then they're claiming 4 to 5 million, right? Interesting. So we talked about The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's massively popular 1915 film, The Birth of the Nation, set during Reconstruction, is credited with spreading and normalizing the Klan's racist ideologies. This is a quote from the article below.
Yeah.
Anyways, here's what they were about. It espoused nativist ideologies.
Okay.
So just you could read pro-American there.
Oh, okay.
Discriminated against any group it deemed un-American. So America first, okay? and supported the culture of Jim Crow segregation with threats and violent acts such as lynching. Right? So this is what you're thinking about.
Okay.
But basically, I want to add to that article that what they were dealing, it was an argument over miscegenation. Are you allowed to interracially marry?
Okay.
And there were laws on the books in the South saying you were not allowed to. And so when somebody would say, hey, we should change that law, these people would go out and actually fight you, though. Like you're like, I'm going to make a new law and we're going to be able to miscegenate our way, you know what I mean? And then so you wake up and there's a burning cross,
Okay.
because fear God, you know what I mean? Don't do, this thing. And so anyways, and then I believe of the people they lynched, 2/3 were white and 1/3 were black.
And so the white people were the ones trying to pass the laws?
Yeah, trying to pass the laws or like the black guys were black guys who had slept with white girls a lot, or even claimed to falsely have done that, because they were trying to keep this barrier in. Diversity is our strength, I'll just say. Okay, so this second iteration ended in 1944. So after World War I.
Okay, wow.
This is World War II time, And we're going to do very quickly the third iteration, which is the current one. It began in independent local groups in 1946 to oppose civil rights movement, but its membership numbers remain much lower at 5,000 to 8,000, and it's officially a terrorist group today.
Nice.
Okay. So I looked for their website,
Okay.
and I'm not going to put a link in the description below because I might get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
But anyways, you can't find their website. So I go on Yandex, search for their website. All the websites come up immediately, of course.
Yeah.
Because they're just censored. So I went to this one. It's called KKKnationaloffice.com, and they list their 3 goals. You go over to the tab, like what are our goals? Here are their 3 goals. Not my goals. I'm just going to read you so you can think about what they're like today. Number 1, become the leader of the white racialist movement. Okay, cool. Number 2, strive to become the representative and driving force behind the white community. Boom.
Okay.
Fine. 3, organize and direct white people to a level of activism necessary to bring about a political victory.
Okay.
Seriously, I went and read top points under that one. That's the entire goal. It's to win offices all around the country.
Just to promote the other couple points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's really going to be a solution in the system for you. Go for it.
All right.
So that's where they're at. And so they're officially a terrorist group because they want small amount of political representation.
Well, because they're white, probably.
They're literally the people who, like, you wake up in the morning and you got like a flyer and a baggie on your door, and it tells you all the houses in your neighborhood that are pedophiles.
Okay.
Because they don't like pedophiles.
Right.
Those so they're terrorists.
Yes.
Anyways, the one that is around today is not the one that you think about.
So it's the second one.
The second one is the one that you think about.
Okay. Gotcha.
Which was made only because of the bravery and courage of the first iteration. The third one's not even trying to emulate the first one.
Right. It's just they've taken the name. Yeah.
Yeah, they've taken the name and they're trying to do this like pro-white type thing.
Right.
Under that name.
Yeah, it's interesting. They've just taken the, interracial stuff, people trying to protect racial purity or whatever, and made that a racist thing. And now they just, they hate black people. They didn't hate black people. It didn't seem like it. They just don't sleep with their daughters. Is that
right? Yeah. Now I think that's the intent of it, but the problem is that people get gung ho,
Oh, and they're like preemptively doing things?
Well, like if we could go back to a video we did pretty recently, Malcolm X.
Okay.
Do you remember? He's in his mother's womb. His dad is out there preaching to Marcus Garvey, blacks back to Africa, and the KKK rolls up around his house and says, "Quit preaching that wildness." So you're trying to keep the blacks here insubordinate?
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So like when you read their official thing, that's what I'm telling you about today is their official thing. But then you look at some of the actions you think of historically when,
sure.
And you think, well, it's not that great.
Yeah.
Because like you don't like those KKK members who really thought about that hard and then went out to Malcolm X's parents' house. Like they really said, you know what, black people, they don't got the right to leave.
Right.
Wait, what? Because if you were to ask me, like most regular people would just say I'm incredibly racist. But if you ask me, I would say, no, they got a right to leave if they want to.
Totally. Yeah.
You're not a hostage, Yeah.
It's
like Martin Luther said, the roads are open.
Right.
Go. The roads are open to a different people, though. A very chosen people.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what I got. What do you think?
Yeah, very eye-opening. I knew none of that, especially the different iterations, that there was a difference between, like, just like how different each one was, and yeah, I love it. That's great.
Yeah. And if you look at our time where elections are just free and fair,
Totally.
everything's on the up and up. You actually are not disenfranchised at all, right? It's good. Now look at your struggle compared to the struggle of the original KKK. We're right there in it. You don't have a vote. No, you have a vote. It's going to count. I promise. It'll count. There won't be any videos of election fraud in 2024.
No.
There won't be people wheeling carts in. There won't be...
Right. People putting up blocks on the windows so you can't see.
That definitely won't happen.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you're in the exact same state. They're too smart nowadays just to tell you, you white guy, you can't vote.
Right.
You black guy, you can't vote.
The end result is the same.
Right. The end result's the same, but they know that because remember when I was reading this, it said the ongoing chaos and popular opposition to the more extreme Reconstruction laws. It wasn't all the Reconstruction laws that were just, it was the more extreme, and it says, we can't stand for this, and that's too far. So they just pretend to take the election from you. And if you, never mind, I won't say the next part, but I'm just saying, think about your position and thinking about these people who went and put on hoods to do things.
Right. To try to
think,
win the rights.
Yeah. Think about where you're at in rights. I think it's
Amazing.
relevant to today.
100%. I'm with you.
Okay.
Love to hear your thoughts about this. Did you learn anything? Did you already know all this stuff, or are you like me and just completely ignorant? Love to hear any thoughts that you have, and we'll catch you next time.